Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily Leader Podcast by Pattern Talent, where we interview great leaders and we seek to understand leadership. I'm Brad McDonald.
And I'm Taylor Jessup, and we really hope that you enjoy this episode.
We are back. Yeah, another episode of the Daily Leader here. Taylor Jessup, Brad McDonald, with a very special guest, Mr. Dan Tocchini, who's a great friend and has been super inspirational in my life, has taught me so many things. And before we get into that, we just want to say, hey, if you're a fan of what we're doing here at the Daily Leader, interviewing incredible leaders, staying curious, really getting into some great conversations, we just ask you to take a minute, subscribe, follow us, text your mother, your father, your sister, brother, go get the Daily Leader tattoo, whatever you got to do to get the message out there. We sure appreciate that. And if you're interested, if this is content that you like and you want to dive deeper, we encourage you to check out our Daily Leader Circle space, where we will continue the conversations that we're having here on that platform. You can find increased levels of accountability, connection, network with people from all over the country. And if you are interested, get in some groups where you can learn more about what we're learning here and really transform your life. So that is so much talking for me to do at the beginning of the show. And with that, man, I really am excited. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Dan and I had a conversation a while back about doing this podcast together. So Brad, would you take a minute and just introduce Mr. Dan to our crew here, our listening crew, and kind of just give them some highlights before we dive in too deep today?
I would love to. Absolutely. So Dan, you are the husband to Eileen. I think that's probably the best thing about you. We'd all agree. You're a father of two. You're a grandfather. You are the co-founder and a senior partner at Take New Ground, an author, consultant, do some executive coaching, but you're also a teacher and a trainer, a developer of leaders. And I've had the pleasure, I worked through one of your older books, which has been a lot of fun for me. And yeah, this was so much fun for me. It was deeply challenging for me to think about where I am pressing in and leaning into victimization and how I'm allowing that to prevent me from really being a committed person in a variety of areas of my life. And then this one has been fun, an ebook called The Change Imperative, which I've been kind of slowly working through. And this one's a little bit more oriented towards business leadership and how to move people through change towards a clear vision and compelling vision. So I've been really enjoying kind of getting to know you from afar, but welcome to the Daily Leader. And thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for a very generous introduction. I can only fall from that pedestal. I look forward to it. I brought my parachute. Let me just say that.
We'll set you up. You're in good company here, Dan. You're in good company.
So thanks for having me.
Our pleasure, man. Well, Dan, here's the deal. Here's something that we've kind of started doing with a lot of our listeners. We want to hear, and we want our listeners to hear your story. Got some great questions I think we'll get into today. One of the ways that we like to get to know our listeners that we found to be the most productive and the most beneficial to like peel back the hood of who is Dan and what you bring to the table and all your years of experience in leadership and training and helping leaders find results and get connected with who they are and their current reality and their vision is to play a game. And we call it the slow burn. It's a game of paradoxes. So we can kind of just throw everything out. We're going to give you some things and we're just going to ask you to pick one. So I'm going to give you two kind of competing thoughts in maybe if I'm leading people or myself. And then what we'd like is, hey, you say this one and why. And we always say to people, hey, you get 30 seconds, but you can go longer than that. It was supposed to be a really fast game. It's kind of more of a slow burn. And then there's a point system that I have that nobody really understands, but we play the game anyways, and I assess some points. So with that, what do you think, Dan? Or can we get to know you a little bit playing a paradoxical game?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Love it, man. All right. Let's start it off. What do you think, Dan? All right. So we're going to give you the first two. So what's more important, being or doing?
Well, you really can't separate the two because being generates doing. So, for instance, being comes out of the way I perceive the world. And the way I perceive the world is the way I talk to myself about the world. And so I'm always making the best choice I see available. And that choice is a result of how I talk to myself about the world. So You ever wonder why somebody makes a stupid choice? They make a stupid choice. You think it's stupid, but to them, it's the best choice they see available. There might be a better choice, but they don't see it because it probably looks like a threat because of how they're talking to themselves about the world. So, how I am or the way I'm being in the world will open up or close down what I'm going to do about what I see in the world through that prism.
Man, you touched on something that I think is so interesting, which is remembering that people are making the best decision that they can. They are being the way that they're showing up is the best way that they know how, right?
Yeah, we're built like that biologically. Just the biological imperative is to keep the spacesuit alive and to save energy in order if it's needed to keep the spacesuit alive, right? So if you're somebody's out there making a choice, they're making a choice because probably occurs to them that's going to bring them the biggest benefit. Nobody gets up in the morning and goes, "Hey, I'm going to make the third best choice I can in the next situation I'm in." Right?
That's so interesting. I love that. I love the loophole in the question. Way to go, by the way. That's great. Because you are right. The way that we are being is going to affect what we are doing, right? So I think that's great.
But if I had to answer your question directly, being is probably more important than doing. Although you can do your way into being because you fail your way into it. But most efficiently, in the idea of staying alive and thriving, one would want to tune the way one's seeing the world, right? And not think that it's happening out there because of some other thing. How I can always control the way I see the world and how I act into it. At least it's the log in my eye, if you would.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, the most efficiently is a great thought there. Like most efficiently, if I'm going to show up most efficiently, my way of being affecting doing is more efficient than my doing impacting my being.
And as the paradox goes, there are times when I must do to find out what to be, right? Like I raised two kids. My daughter, I often did, I had to be clear. I had to be clear about how I was being, but a lot of times I'd take a swipe at it and find out, oh wow, that didn't work, and I wasn't even aware that I was being that way, so I could make a shift. And then her seeing me shift actually impacted her about wow. One day she told me, "I know how much you love me by how many times you continue to pursue me, even when you fail reaching for me." Right. So
That's a pretty intuitive child. How old was Liz when she said that?
she was 13. The story's the story's pretty remarkable. She doesn't. I've got permission to share it if you want to hear it.
Sure, I do. I'd love it.
I love it.
You've met Liz, right?
Yeah.
And when she was 13, she was out experimenting with sex and drugs. I mean, at a young age, because we were living in Michigan and close to Detroit, and I discovered this because Dan and his friend were over where we were celebrating his best friend's father's 50th birthday, and Lizzie was there, and she's good friends with his best friend, and we're all hanging out. We have a nice dinner, and then we sit down to smoke a cigar and have dessert, and she goes off to be just to hang out with this kid Derek, and my son takes off with his girlfriend to do some homework at the library, and my wife gets this premonition that Derek's forcing himself upon my daughter. And she goes upstairs and catches him on top of her. And so you can imagine this kid's about 6 foot tall. She's got him by the ear and bringing him down the stairs. We just celebrated his dad's 50th birthday. Most awkward scene I have ever experienced. And my wife is livid. My wife is like coming out of her skin. So I had to calm her down politely. We'll talk tomorrow. The cigars don't get, that's all kiboshed. And I go up and talk to Lizzie, and Lizzie's like, I go, come on, tell me what's going on. And she just basically giving me the finger, just cold as ice. And so my point to her was, look, until you are willing to talk about it, I can't bestow trust upon you. I want to understand. And she said, she just refused. So I started taking her to school and to whatever she had going, no socializing. And that went on for about a month and a half. And I got so desperate. She was cold hard. I couldn't break through to her. And I tried multiple things. I mean, the first time I went into her room to help her with her homework, she just looked at me and said, "Oh, is this your effort at being a good father now?" I mean, like that. It's that kind of attitude. And did mom send you in here? That kind of stuff, like constant cynicism. And I'm heartbroken. So one day I call a friend in California because I love this kid's, his family, the way he brought him up. And he just said something to me. He said, I can't choose for you, Dan. I can't be your cult leader, but I can say this. Let them know what they mean to you. Declare the future you're committed to with them, how much you care for them. Don't get off that. So I kept doing that. About 3 months in, nothing. And I'm driving her to a dance class in Ann Arbor, and snowing. We're in this big expedition. She's only 5'10", 4'10", little thing, barely fits in the front seat, and the seatbelt could come right out of it. And I pull over and I just start to weep and tell her, I love you. I am failing you. I see it. I am not a good father. I don't know what it's going to take, but I want you to know one thing, young lady. I will never give up. I will pursue you until I connect with you. So I want you to know I am not giving up. And I'm weeping. And she jumps out of her chair, buries her head in my chest, and says, I love the way you love me. And I'm afraid you hate Derek. It wasn't his fault. I egged him on. I participated, then I didn't know how to stop it. Dad, please don't. It separated me and Danny. Understand that it was me as much as him, and and I just didn't know how to stop it. And she was so. And then we never made it to dance class. We just talked, and the car was all fogged up. I'll never forget it. We drive home, and she gives me her diaries and says, "Read these, you'll understand." You never want to read your daughter's diaries. Let me just tell you that. But it since that from that time, she and I have been like this. I never told her she ought to bring her boys home. Like she dated 3 men, and she brought everyone home. Wanted me to meet them, had them do the training. Really was concerned about how her brother and I related to them. And she married Malcolm, the third one. And we never told her she should or shouldn't, but she gauged her like how are they going to fit in the family, which I never that wasn't something I was promoting, right? I just wanted her to know that I was with her, and from that time on, like this. But that's where she came up with
I mean, that is an intuitive thought for a 13-year-old girl. And it is fascinating to me that nothing in your doing necessarily it wasn't your actions as much as it was the way you were being with her, right?
that.
The
I
way
just
that you
refused
showed
to
up.
give up. I at one point I realized, well, it's either her or me, and I'd rather have me win in this case because if I give up on her, what's she going to think? That's the one thing that just couldn't get off my mind. Like, what's she going to say in the years to come? I have I think God has blessed me with the looking ahead. Like that's what got me out of I was a gangster type kid. Grew up in the street, really resisted the faith. And but I always would look into the future. Like if I keep doing this, what's coming? I think of Gideon. He had to select the men that drank water and looked at the horizon. I have always looked at the horizon. I think that's been probably the best aspect of it. And that's not something I've thought about. It just seems to come automatic to me. I think that's a gift from.
Yeah, it is. And it's a gift that you've helped impart on others because the truth is, if I want to stay out of the ditch, or like when you're learning to drive a car, right? You can't focus on the other cars around you. You actually have to look at the horizon if you want to like get to where you're going.
Like riding a bike, right? I do a lot of road biking. And if you're going along the cliff, you don't want to look over the cliff because that's where the bike's going.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Wherever. And there's a lot of things. Snowboarding is like that. That's how I got taught to snowboard. Where you look, that's where you're going to go. That's where you're going to end up. Right. And I think that is a great. I mean, I've been, just went through the Intrepid Academy. As a huge takeaway for me is, hey, my vision, where I want to go, where I'm actually looking is where I will end up. So where I am now is a result of what that vision was. So if I'm not happy here, then I created that. But the neat thing that I think he realized is if you're not happy here, you don't have to stay here.
Yeah. I mean, I had to get to the place where I realized my grandfather said it to me. It stuck with me. He said, Junior, you can't explain your way out of what you behaved your way into. Stop, at least not with me and nobody else. They may buy, but what they're buying is going to be disappointing because you're going to do it again.
There's just a lot of wisdom. Yeah. All right. Well, we made it through one. That's great. We'll keep we'll keep going here. This is so good. All right, and this kind of ties into that, relationships or results, man. You're in the business world. I know results are really heavy, but also people run those businesses. So if we're going to put you in that rock and a hard place, what's more important, relationships, results?
Well, it depends. Are you committed to short term gain and long term pain, or are you committed to long term gain and short term pain? So there's an axiom in there which goes relationship is what produces the results I have. Now, when I say results, it's not just like sales. Let's say we're talking sales. It's not just how many sales the team's made, but it's the long term relationship that we have with both our clients and ourselves. Now I can go out there and I can treat my clients like tools, and I can use manipulative means. I can use, guilt and shame, etc. And I'm going to make sales initially, short term gain, but in the long term, I'm going to have to work much harder, and I'm going to burn what would normally be a long tail, what would normally build, a reference base, right? So I'm going to constantly be starting over. So relationship is, I would say, directly to your question, like being, all action comes out of relationship. So what relationship am I generating, and what kind of action is it producing, right? So, we've all been treated well by a salesperson who says, look, I don't think this is for you right now. I think this is for you, even though they're not going to make as much on that, or they may refer you to another vendor because they get that's going to serve you. Well, you're going to come back to this salesperson, and I think that's true in any relationship. That if the relationship is founded on a wholeness, integrity, wholeness meaning I'm willing to speak even when it's not to my advantage, but serves the other person in the long run, that's going to produce in a very abundant future. I'm going to have long term gain.
Yeah, that is so good, and I hope our listeners hear on that. Brad and I both worked for Chick-fil-A. That's how we got to know each other, and the deal there, right, is people before profits, right? And we'd always say, hey, if you put the people before the profits will eventually take care of themselves, and exponentially, right? I mean, I go to my head immediately when you're depicting that. I went to the Dave Ramsey in his, Financial Peace University. He talks about the idea that, hey, remember in the tortoise and the hare, the tortoise always wins every time. So no, you may not hit your sales numbers, right now, but we're not talking just right now. We're talking about the vision that you want for yourself and your company, like overall, not just today.
And are you can tell when somebody's got a long term game. They can see the when you're looking up. So what gauges are you looking at? What are the uh, what do you call it? The indicators that are going to tell you the long term game is coming, right? What are the indicators? What are the, I forgot what they call it. The like you have lagging indicators, like, oh, okay, that worked in the past because I've got it now. But what are the indicators that tell you what the future is going to look like? That foretell, hey, we're on the path, even though we don't have it right now. We can see it's coming if we follow this. These indicators tell us it's going to happen, right? And then I can turn up the heat on that.
Yeah, and you can tell those people that care, right? We've all met a salesperson that you're like, okay, you want this sale more than you care about the person that's actually making the sale, right? And you may even buy from that person, but you're probably only buying from them once because you got what you needed.
Yeah, I one of the future indicators is how fascinated is somebody with what they're up to, because fascination is the true and proper mother of discipline, right? So true because it's sustainable. Somebody who's fascinated with what they're doing will sustain their work because they're constantly finding nuances that are intriguing. And within those nuances, there are other nuances, and that actually brings power to their ability to order the world or find order in the chaos. And then it's proper because it isn't forced. It's something that's generated from a passion that is, coming out of the fascination. It's connecting to a future I want to have. And I'm fascinated with how that future is seated in this moment.
That resonates so much with our value of curiosity, Dan. That's one of the things that Taylor and I have really anchored on, and we'll get to this a little bit later in our slow burn. But fascination to me seems almost like a deeper, richer version of curiosity. Like curiosity maybe is a part of this bigger principle of fascination.
Yeah, and because there's a kind of curiosity that's damaging, and then there's the kind of curiosity, and that the kind that's damaging is strictly curiosity for entertainment's sake, right? But the curiosity to serve, the curiosity to bring something into being that's greater than me, is a very powerful way of standing in the world, in my experience. And one can be confident in it, like you, I. The more I can stand in the ambiguity of whatever is, standing in new ground, right? Like when I get fascinated with something, I'm going to start to go into territory I've never been before, and that produces a deep willingness to experiment and learn from the mistakes. Whereas if I'm there for entertainment or self gratification or signification, I'm going to take on the losses or the misses as if they're statements of who I am versus the journey I'm on. And my son is a remarkable engineer, remarkable. He's and that's one of the things I'm always fascinated with watching him is he can stay with a problem for so many weeks, months, years. He's been working on an AI problem for 14 years, and of course now he's coming out ahead, and and he's got a tool that nobody's got. He's just starting to launch, but to watch him stay with that is so inspiring, even in the face of having to struggle for the monthly rent, right? And now he's starting to break through, right? It's so inspiring.
100%. Yeah, he let that fascination take hold and just continue to come, which is something that is rare in 2024. Where like an Instagram culture where you just scroll through the reels of what people are doing. You know, it's that's kind of the opposite.
It's interesting. He didn't have a cell phone for 5 years. I go, why? He said, too much of a distraction, Dad. I go, we can get on your computer. He goes, not likely, because I don't go outside. I do. He lives on a farm too, right? So he goes, when I'm not doing this, when I'm not engineering, programming, etc., I'm out there with the sheep, the cattle, and whatever they're working.
I love that. So much good stuff already. All right, we're gonna keep rolling on the slow burn. All right, rocking a hard place again. Values or vision?
Well, now that's an interesting distinction. Values or vision? Well, I would have to say that vision comes out of values. So so I would say values is probably you know more efficient again, but because these are paradoxes, so there's a tension. I can have values if I have no vision, then probably just going to I'm going to be stuck. I'm going to be self-righteous maybe even because I have my values, but I'm not producing anything. I don't have the values aren't being put to test. But if I have a vision, I'm going to find out where I am in relationship to my values because having the vision come into existence, I'm going to come up against selling out for the short term gain. And so, it's like I think about uh, Jacob and his brother Esau. Jacob had a vision and values, and Esau was just into his values. He wanted to eat. It was valuable for him to keep himself alive, and didn't think he could make it. And so he would rather be satisfied. And what he paid for is giving away his future. That kind of thing. So if you're wrapped in your values at the moment, you're going to probably be momentarily. They're going to probably be biological because you're not. You're going to probably spend your future in the moment, and that leaves you wanting.
Dan, what's more important in leadership, vulnerability or strength?
Vulnerability is strength. Vulnerability is strength in the sense that I'm vulnerable to that which is wanted and needed from me based on what I say most important, the future I'm committed to. And so in order to get there, it takes vulnerability. And in order to be vulnerable, I have to be clear about who I am and up for the challenges that are going to transform me. And it takes strength to be able to fail and get back up again but that comes out of the willingness to be vulnerable first, right? And I discover new strength when I'm vulnerable to what matters to me. So, I mean, I had no idea how much I love my wife until, I was faced with. I'll never forget, these guys surrounded our car. My mother's driving. I'm in the front seat. My little brother, my sister, my wife are in the back seat. And these guys surrounded our car in this dark street in the middle of the night after a movie, and they were closing in. And my mother wouldn't step on the gas. I go, keep stepping. She goes, I'll hit him. I said, that's all right. They'll get out of the way. Right as I decide to jump out of the car to confront these guys, she steps on the gas, and I end up with my butt in the middle of three guys. And then I'm, scuffling with them, and the police break it up. They were there watching it, thank God. And I remember thinking, what did I just do? That was really crazy. But I realized the strength, courage that came out of me was a result of the values, the vision I had, the of what mattered to me the most. So I didn't even think about it. It just came out of me. I always say, people say, what would you do if someone? I don't know what I do, but it probably, if it's threatening my values, or something I really care about in the future, I'm probably going to move towards it and get vulnerable. And that brings the strength of, and that takes, like, there's my wife, my mother, my brother, and me in the car. So the fact that they could be hurt was brought strength, vulnerability, and then strength to stand in that. And I'll never forget when the cop grabbed my arm after I actually kicked one of these guys pretty hard, and they started closing in on me. That guy went down, and there was a cop there, like bam, and I didn't realize the lights were on and everything. I didn't see him until he grabbed my arm and said, "I saw everything. Relax, we got this," and they let me go because they saw the whole thing. But I'll never forget thinking, "Wow, I never thought I would do that. I didn't know I had that in me."
Okay, so a little tangential here, Taylor, in the spirit of taking our time through this. Why is it, Dan, that I am so terrified of being vulnerable? Why am I so resistant to the call to be vulnerable as a leader?
Well, I mean, I think it's. I mean, I know why I am. Look, human beings are dangerous. Let's get real. You're dangerous. I'm dangerous. We know how dangerous people are. We know. And they're not controllable. They're unpredictable. And so when I step out and speak what really matters to me, I'm putting at stake, Kierkegaard would say, to stand in the crowd is to face ridicule and slander and murder in the long run, even. Because if you stand up, you're gonna generate inspiration and envy, right? And inspiration. So let me just clarify that distinction. To be inspired is to see, is to be, to inspire people is to people, like you watch a great athlete, you see somebody who's been crippled, and like I was watching this guy who did high jump at the Olympics with one leg, right? That's inspiring because they've overcome so much. Now, when you start doing that, you've seen, we've seen all the movies and we've seen the stories where people like who are inspiring, who step out, get hammered, and people try to take them down, right? In the Italian culture, my grandfather used to say they use the malocchio, the evil eye, and the idea was never to stand out too much because it's Jacob's jacket, right? You put the jacket on, you wear it. Well, you're probably going to provoke envy. Envy is distinct from jealousy. Jealousy is I want what you have, right? I want what you have could be very healthy. I want what you have and I can model you and get up to it. It can also be unhealthy. But when it gets really unhealthy, it transforms into envy, which is I don't want you to have what you have. Right? So I want what you have is jealousy. I don't want you to have, and it's delusional. There's a guy named Helmut Schuch who wrote a book called Envy. And he said every culture he studied out of 180 cultures, some had a nomenclature for envy. And he supposed that envy is what generated man's need for law, because envy always ends in murder. In the scripture, it says it was for envy that they put him on the cross. They they didn't want him to have the people's adoration. After they realized they couldn't harness him and they couldn't generate the same care and love from the people, they wanted to destroy him so he wouldn't have it. And that's an archetype for all of us. Aquinas says the most difficult sin to confess is envy, because if I if I'm gluttonous, you know what I get from it. If I'm slothful, you know what I get from it. If I'm covetous, you know what I get from it, right? But what do you get from envy, right? And that's why Aquinas said it's the most difficult sin, or missing the mark, that we as humans face. You can, it usually shows up. It starts in comparison. Not that there are healthy comparisons. I could say, hey, let's compete with each other. But if the comparison is not checked, if you that relationship of comparison is what generates envy, and divide and conquer. Well, hey, Brad, let me tell you, Brad, about Taylor. Did you know blah 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 blah? And you and I know that, but he doesn't. And let's not tell him about it. I don't want to make him feel insecure, right? So if the three of us are working together, I'm now dividing and conquering. It's a form of envy, because I'm using comparison to take the affections that he rightfully should have from you as much as I can away from him. And the nomenclature for envy is witchcraft. It's Jezebel with Ahab.
That's an incredible that's an incredible connection, and that very much resonates with me. I think this leads into the next paradox pretty well. And these are two new ones that we're trying, so I'm excited. I'm excited for the direction you took that in. What about openness or decisiveness in leadership? What's more important?
Openness or decisive? That's a good question. Okay, so they're so necessary, because if you think of decisiveness as being forthright, right, or being or having confidence in your opinion, that's all. Let's say you're decisive about what you believe, and openness is I'm willing to understand. I'm open and reflective on what other beliefs are. So if I'm too high on decisiveness, I'm going to show up as dogmatic. Other people won't be able to play unless they believe exactly like I do. If I'm too open and not decisive enough about my own opinion, then I'm going to be wishy-washy, and I'm going to be inconclusive, and I'm going to wait and try to get other people to decide for me, because I'm afraid to make the decision, because I'm not decisive enough or confident enough in my own decisions. So the idea in order to explore reality, I've got to have a very clear confidence in my own opinion, as well as open and reflective of yours. That creates iron sharpening iron. Your opinions can sharpen mine. Together we can find what's really the reality of the truth that's going on. If that makes sense, that's how it occurs to me.
And a follow on to that is culture or productivity.
There's a saying. They always give Drucker the compliment of the saying, but he didn't say it. He alluded to it, but they think it's actually. I read a bunch of research on it, that this saying it was either Jobs or Welch that came up with it, Jack Welch, and it's culture eats strategy for breakfast. So culture and productivity. Well, I would suggest that productivity is a result of a culture that's willing to learn what's wanted and needed to produce what they're aiming at. And and so productivity is the result of, and I'd say you want to balance those. I don't know if they're necessarily paradoxical, but I can see how which, because it's really culture and strategy, right? I think that's the paradox.
That's interesting. No, we've never had someone tell us our paradox is wrong. So this is good education for us.
It just occurs to me that way. I don't know that that's right.
You're making me question the way that those two are pitted against each other, and if whether or not it is a true paradox, right?
Yeah, I guess why I say culture and strategy is because the tension between relation ethos and strategy, ethos being culture, is that when there's a good balance between the two, you have productivity, because the culture causes the willingness to move, to learn, to respect, eat, listen, work with, resource other people. And strategy is putting that relationship into a very effective format or structure that that can be executed, and it's dynamic because the culture, it knows that the map isn't the territory, and so the map can change as you discover. So you're on the territory, and it says there's a river here with a bridge, but the bridge has been blown up. That doesn't show up on the map. So now they can tactically get around it because they're aware of strategically what you're trying to accomplish. And the culture isn't is grounded in having the vision come about rather than signify the individuals. It's like that kind of tension.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Productivity is probably a byproduct of the right culture and strategy, right? If you have a solid culture and a solid strategy, productivity will be the byproduct. But maybe it's not as paradoxical as culture is to productivity. Because in that, you're saying you can only have one or the other, culture and productivity, which one, right? Which is not necessarily. Uh,
Yeah, I would say so. If you think about paradox, the challenge of navigating paradox lies in the ability to hold seemingly contradictory truths or forces simultaneously without resorting to simplistic resolutions or binary thinking, if that makes sense. So they're, they're inherent to leadership and personal. It's like uh, paradox is like leadership relationships and personal growth, and they often demand flexibility, humility. Like there's another paradox, and capacity to embrace complexity, right? So you've got to be able to accept ambiguity. You've got to be able to manage inner conflict because that comes up. You got to balance competing demands and create constant tension, right? So what leaders tend to do is they tend to want to release or reduce the tension rather than navigate it, learn to live in it. The minute I start to try to reduce the tension of a natural paradox, I get off purpose. Now I'm mission leak because now I'm trying to reduce my tension rather than have the vision turn out. And those tensions are natural.
Oh, that makes so much sense. And I think that the seasoned leaders that I have watched have challenged me in this as a young, aspiring, emerging leader in so many ways to be able to withstand having your ideals pulled apart and to forge forward while two things you hold dear are seemingly uh, irreconcilable. The seasoned leader is like strong enough; they have the grip to and the determination to manage that. Whereas, as an emerging leader, I'm like, okay, make this go away, eject. How do I get out of this?
oh no, that's the point of this game, right? The game is, hey, let's live in the tension of the two. Like we're going to give you two things, right? And it's easier, I think, as a leader, right? I think we perceive that there's safety if we can choose one or the other. There's a perceived sense of safety as a human to say, if I make choice A or choice B, I don't want to live in that tension of both of them being a reality. Then I feel safer. So I'm going to gravitate towards, whatever it is, results over relationship. That feels safer. But the actual results, the actual what I really need to do, I see it as a pendulum, right? One side to the other. And you watch this in all things. Politics, when shit gets hard, we go one way really hard. And you see that happening. People get more polarized rather than can I live in the tension in the middle, right? And I don't know if this fits with your thinking, Dan, but the way that the world occurs to me is that people are always trying to be safe. We're always trying to create safety for ourselves. And so we end up landing on one side or the other because and I don't even say there is safety there. I say there's a perceived sense of safety if I can say, yes, it is inherently this, and I can place it in that, rather than living in the tension of, what, the truth is often a lot more, there is truth. And it's kind of this gray tension that's really hard and, vulnerable and scary and all those kind of things that I may not want to expose myself to.
Well, you hit on it. I would say to that point that if you talk to a lot of leaders, just and you talk about awareness, they'll think that that's like luxury or something or side. It's a damn weapon. Self-awareness is a weapon because I think the key, in my experience, what you just talked about, the way I'd sum it, is that the key to successfully navigating paradox is embracing a both and thinking over an either or thinking. And that it's all mindset, which allows individuals and teams to find creative solutions, adapt to complexity, leverage the strengths of opposing forces to generate breakthroughs. That's a big deal. I had a friend named Ennio. He's dead now. He was a dear friend, Ennio Salucci, and he was a trainer with us. And he used to say, "We're either justifying our intentions or managing our impact. We're either being right or making right."
There is so much more power in the both and.
Both and I mean, there are certainly times when there's either or, but you get to the either or, the right either or, the ones that are going to be most potent. When you're both and, when you're thinking both and, you can narrow them down. And there are definitely, as Kierkegaard points out, there is either or, because there are value. It's like either I'm going to take the short term gain or the long term gain. Which one is it, right? But that comes from a both and thinking, as considering the complexity of what I'm facing in the context that I'm in.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And the idea of a paradox is that there are choices. That either or is a possibility. There is a potential that we actually really over index into something. And I think that it's sometimes, as leaders, it's about managing the tension, right? And having the grip strength to do that. But other times it's about going full bore, unapologetically, completely into one decision that it's like, whoa, 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 what about this over here? And the leader has the wisdom and the judgment to say, no, 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 this is not the time for that.
Oh, you're triggering a bunch of stuff, like, right?
Yeah, well, let it rip. Let it rip. Don't let me darken our
No, that was that. I mean, right on. I mean, it really gets into how one uses their whiteboard time. Their deep work time. It's like when you said that, I was thinking, yeah, how do I use my deep work time? Do I use it trying to validate what I want to see, or do I use it challenging what I'm looking at, challenging my beliefs about what I'm seeing, challenging what I'm feeling insecure about, challenging myself in a way that I'm willing to move into the new ground. And to your point, why I think vulnerability and just this whole idea of why it's so uncomfortable for us is because we don't know what's in the new ground, but we're dying to take new ground because we know new ground's where the vision is. And so we're perpetually moving into new ground. And in new ground, there's new predators, there's new, you know, uh, potential traps, etc. And so, of course, we ought to have some intrepidation, which which benefits one to be thoughtful, uh, curious, and confident. Like a lot of people don't seem to put those together. Like you can be curious and confident. In fact, in order to be effectively curious, you better be confident that no matter what happens, you can recover yourself. You're going to stand anyway, right? I'm going to do what it takes. And I've had people tell me, "Well, you're just so certain." And I said, "Well, I could be, or I could be confident that I'm going to go in this direction now after I've thought about it, and I'm confident that if I miss, I can recover, and I'll learn my way into it."
Is so interesting. The confidence in my ability to question what am I thinking, actually gives me more confidence in the answer that I'm going to come up with, or the leadership and the direction that I'm going to take my team. If I'm confident enough to actually question, could I be seeing what could be missing and that I'm seeing? What could I not be seeing? Where could I be wrong? Now, I'm going to put this out there for the internet to hear, and I hope that this affects the 2028 election. This is my idea. I want elections. I want the debate before the election for the Republican candidate and the Democratic candidate to have to argue the other side.
Right
I
on.
want them, because that would actually illuminate,
Let's include the independents.
and the independent. For me, it's, hey, whoever can get in there and gets the votes. We shouldn't be excluded, and RFK Jr. We want all those people in there. But for me, I would I would feel like I would have a much better idea of the person, the actual person that I'm voting for, and the way that they go about making decisions and thinking about policies, if they're able to tell me and articulate in a good way from the other side. Because what they've just told me is I have not just sat in my own shoes and my perspective about this certain situation, but I've considered all perspectives. And if I consider all perspectives and I still land where I land at the end of the day, fantastic.
Right on, right on. Yeah, and that I think the fear there is that I'm going to be persuaded, and I think, I know that's for me. It comes up as like, well, I don't want to hear this opinion because I could be persuaded off of my position. But I mean, that's inevitably going to be most valuable. But in that moment, I don't necessarily always realize that that's where self awareness again is a weapon. I go, okay, I can still do this. Yeah. And if I'm aware of it, I can do something with it, right? I can choose how I relate to the fear.
Yes. Can you confidently question the way that you are thinking about something currently? About the way the world occurs to you? Can I question the way that I'm perceiving it? I even think about that with faith. Can I do that? I think a lot of times people consider that disowning your faith if you're going to question it. And I would say, no, it's strengthening it. You can strengthen it if you can sit on the other side and make those. What is it? The brothers Karamazov? Did I pronounce that right? That I started that you gave us, a few weeks back.
You started reading it. You started reading it.
I started listening to it. Yeah, I got so far in, I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to take. I think the book on Audible, I put it at like 1.5 times speed. It's like 32 hours. So I'm getting there.
It's definitely a journey, but I mean, he's covering 5 really powerful questions about faith and living as a human.
Yeah. Just question. I was just on that note. Okay, our next one. We got a few more of these. So, what is better? Talking about paradoxes. If you had to choose, questions or answers, Dan?
Well, I would choose questions because they generate it. You either live out of a question or an answer. If you live out an answer, then you're out proving you're right. If you live out a question, you're out wondering what's the most powerful, because every question has multiple answers. I remember my son one time when he's about 12 said, Dad, he did something and I was going to sit him down and have a talking to. I go, let's have an inquiry. And he said, can you just spank me? I go, why? He goes, James' dad spanks him and it's over. You ask me questions and have too many answers, right? And and he would rather get spanked than go through the mental exercise. I started with him when he was 4 years old. Like, okay, let's talk about you and your sister there. But I think I would say, I think being in a question, and again, it's a paradox. You're going to come up with answers, but you're going to choose the answer that's most relevant to what you're committed to, and then go full speed into the answer. Then question again that answer in the next context as you move along. Right? It's like it's a paradox. That's what it's there for. So the idea that one's better than the other would be more like, well, yeah, initially one, I would do the questions and then I'd be aware of what answers come up. Then I'd take that answer, go full speed, and then I question that. It's like the tension. It's like the pendulum. You're right. You got to just, or you got to navigate that tension. That's a good one, man.
It's fun to me. I like that one. I'm a Jesus person, and I pulled this up. Just asking Google's AI, but Jesus asked 307 questions. Like we only have, depending on which gospel, X amount of time, and the cat asked 307 questions. Like if from it,
Places he actually is prescriptive.
correct, correct.
Do you know where the most prescriptive I found him to be?
Where's that?
Where he talks about when there's an offense, you go to your name. I go to the person personally. Then I go if we can't reconcile, I go to a third party and then if that doesn't work, I go to the church. Because I think that's a guard against envy, against gossip and slander. Envy's minions are gossip, slander, and talebearing, and they result in murder. First in the murder of reputation, then ultimately in the murder of the person's body. There's a whole hierarchy there. It comes from self-awareness.
All right, so this one might be a little bit more of a slow pitch for you, but I'm interested to see the journey or the destination, Dan.
The destination I got to be clear about so that the journey can begin. So, if I'm not clear about the destination, the journey can't start. But after I'm clear about the destination, I have to be clear about where I'm standing in relationship to the destination. and then the journey can begin. So again, it's attention, right? The journey is probably the most, that's where you find the destination over and over again. Like that's where you see the leading indicators of, oh, if I do this and I get here, I'm closer to there. And that's, and so now the object becomes go from here to there. Now, when I get there, how do I get to the next? Right. So once I have the destination, then the hierarchy of concerns will unfold, and I'll know I'll purposely begin the journey.
Yeah, that's an interesting framework that I got to know to where I'm really know where I'm going to get on the journey. Because maybe the thought is, because I think there's all those bumper stickers. Not all who are wondering are lost. But I wonder, if you don't know the destination, are you just wandering? And so you are. Does that make sense?